my my day job computer, the HDMI cable doesn't work anymore, the outlet. So I need a new desk because my computer doesn't work.
Yeah, that's a good purchase.
Oh, we're live.
Are we live? Hey, we're live. Thanks.
We're doing it live.
I was making sure my sound was muted, but hello, everyone. Welcome to the late Slate Sweat and Swap Show. We're going to talk about the slate that's going on right now. We're going to talk about the night slate, which had a ton of news popping up since you heard about it a couple hours ago. But I'm Chris Spags, joined by your old pal and mine. You know him, you love him. He's EMac. How are you doing, EMac?
I'm doing good. We left on a high note that last slate, Chris. I was lamenting in the late swaps, and there was all those issues, and I said I felt like I was donating, and I only made 40 lineups on the final one. I ended up, and I just put them in the quarter and the dollar. I ended up making like $400.
Oh, there you go. Nice little night at the office here. I'm sure
it's because better to be lucky than good.
Yeah,
it's better to be lucky than good.
I think Greg was talking about that today on the Live Before Lock show with our pal Eric Lindquist, who I see in chat with his little smiling acting headshot there. So give your shout outs to Eric, who's doing some of the deeper dive shows, some of the Live Before Lock shows, get in the mix a bit more there. But first of all, guys, make sure you hit that like button now. This show really needs your support to stay going here, to make sure that we have the engagement to keep up with all the other programming on the channel. So if you want to see more late slate shows, make sure you're watching every night. Put it on in the background if you're not even playing the late slate. Make sure you are hitting that like button. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well. We have tons of content going on all day long. Starts at 6:30 in the morning on the East Coast with Josh's process videos, and then just keeps going on until this show, sometimes even more after us. So that's the joys you get from the Awesemo YouTube channel. So make sure you are subscribed and hit the notification bell as well to know whenever we go live. EMac, let's talk about the main slate for a second here. We've got a lot of news I'm sure that people are going to want to dig in on. John Wall ruled out. We do have news. The other Porter Jr., Kevin Porter Jr., going to be available for the Rockets tonight in a game where you have to assume he's going to get some decent run. But EMac, the main slate, how are you feeling about that? Anything that you feel like you got particularly right today that you're reaping the benefits of in your lineups right now?
Let's look. It's kind of, I did some of those, what do you call them? Best balls. So it's kind of screwing up my currently winnings and entry fees and all of that. So just eyeballing some of the players here. I did nothing too crazy. I ended up skipping the first game, which is Charlotte and Detroit. Now, granted, they had a half-hour head start of everybody else, but right now, Jeremy Grant just crested over 40 DK points. PJ Washington looking to join him. I suspect those guys are going to get passed by about another 20 players or so at some point here as the rest of the games come down the way. So the one good thing I did listening to Eric Lindquist on the earlier show was I earmarked about 25% of my lineups for Victor Oladipo. So I have him right now with everything else that I wanted from the earlier games, and I'm going to take another run at that and see if that's something I want to swap to a little bit more as well. I think that is going to be interesting, but still a little early to be doing victory laps. I think Norman Powell was an interesting call at 7,200. We got to disassociate the name and realize that the Toronto Raptors are without three of their key starters. I'm going to count OG Anunoby as a starter in this, but no Pascal Siakam and no Fred VanVleet. That's opening up a boatload of usage, and they were in a great matchup here against Atlanta. And then we'll see. I liked Giannis Antetokounmpo and Julius Randle going head to head. That game's still in the first half, so nothing to really see. I think it's still in the first half. Nothing to really see there. Yeah, they got 30 seconds left. 65-50 New York. Fingers crossed Giannis gets a little more run. But I went that route when we had all of the extra value popping up today.
Yeah, Giannis was a guy on the tip-off show today. Ben Ross and I were both on the under for points for Giannis. And actually, I did say it was one of the ongoing bits for the tip-off show, which if you're not watching, it's right before the deeper dive every day. And usually every day it's with Kayla hosting, one of our newer personalities here on the Awesemo channel, doing a great job learning the sport as much as she can on the fly and contributing with a lot of personality that a lot of us don't have on the channel. But also Ben Rasa on one of the heaters of all heaters with his prop bets of the day on there. And for some reason now we've started to call him Dr. Ben Rasa, which I just think is funny. I don't know. It's one, you got to find your joy somewhere in life, and calling Ben Rasa Dr. Ben Rasa and acting like he is a doctor of sports betting brings me a lot of joy. But Giannis today, I just felt like there are a lot of ways for him to have a decent fantasy day, but maybe not get there points wise. And there's prop betting is something we talk about a lot more where on Odd Shopper, we've started to promote more the tools that we have on there from Awesemo, where you now could see ROI numbers, win percentage numbers based on Awesemo's projections with a little bit of standard deviation thrown on, so you know just how much these bets are going to hit, how frequently they are, and what the best values are. So make sure you're checking that out at oddshopper.awesemo.com. But Giannis in this spot, I feel like, is the one star today that's coming through, where I have a lot of good value plays in my lineups tonight. Aaron Baines is a guy that I had 40% of because of the value going elsewhere. And the one spot here where normally you're petrified if you have Aaron Baines early, and then you start getting news that, you know, the Kevin Porter Juniors of the world are out there, the Tony Bradleys of the world are out there. But I felt good about the play, went in with it, and he's having one of the best days he's probably had since he was a Phoenix Sun. And I feel like that's a spot where, you know, you get Aaron Baines going off in a major way, normally the other guys are going to come through. And instead, it's now James Harden, Tobias Harris, Kyle Lowry, all these guys who projected so well, EMac, who I would have thought were some of the safest plays on the slate, who are playing at least mediocre, if not absolutely terrible in some of the situations.
Yeah, and that was the wild thing totally today, Chris, was we're coming out of the break. Everybody's had, the vast majority of the leagues had a full week off, and yet we still had foolishness like John Wall and a few others. It's just like really the last bit of news about John Wall coming into this morning was he played their last couple back-to-backs. They're expecting to have him tonight and tomorrow because Houston is playing tomorrow. Now, I was thinking, how are they going to split up him and Oladipo? Because they'd sort of been staggering for the most part. And I'm like, well, were they going to sit somebody right out of the break? I guess they are. We'll have to find out how serious that one is. I see Grand Attraction a little worried we're not talking about the 3-night games. Hey, don't worry. We'll get there. We have time. We're professionals. We do this. You know, we had 7 hours leading up to this show covering this slate today.
I mean, we make sure that we budget everything around here. And part of the understanding the late slate, especially as we talk about swap optimizing and all of that, is talking about the observations from the main slate. And trust us, we may not be doctors of sports betting and DFS like our pal Ben Rasa, but we know the prescription for you on this show every night, and that is going to be talking about the main things that are going on, observing some of the plays out there. EMac mentioned Jeremy Grant. I did talk more about him. But that's sort of what we do on this show, is that we're talking about everything holistically before we get to the late slate, rather than just trying to fill an hour talking about 3 games that you've heard about for the most part all day long. So strap in, have a good time. I would say for me with Jeremy Grant, the one thing that jumps out, and I really was down on him before the All-Star break, and you can point to some of the rate data without Delon Wright, who made a kind of surprise appearance today, a surprise cameo, returning to the starting lineup for Detroit. But Jeremy Grant was a much worse player all year long without Delon Wright, and it doesn't make sense. I mean, I guess Delon could be the guy who sets him up more, but I was watching this game because it was the only one going early. And Jeremy Grant might be just one of those guys who, a new role for him, coming from being a role player in Denver and really everywhere else he's been. This year, he's the star player. And I think maybe one of those guys who has some of that All-Star break fatigue going into the last few games of the All-Star break, where he ruled out a few games there with a quad injury. Before that, too, just not shooting as much, not as effective when he was shooting. And he's come out looking like a man-possessed, EMac. And I know you are a veteran of the industries, and you've been around watching these teams, watching all these players for years now. But do you give a boost to certain players here? Like, do you have any sort of way or eyeball test you're looking at where, oh, this guy started the first half or ended the first half slowly of the season. Now he's coming back. He had a little bit of rest, maybe a little bit of renewed focus. Do you give a boost to guys like Jeremy Grant, who were on, I'd say, an objectively cold run heading into the All-Star break, and now we're seeing them, and maybe he deserves to be looked at a little more closely because of the fact that he's just going to be a little fresher and ready to go?
Yeah, I think with him, it's twofold. They've sort of changed the entire team around him. So there could be a little less familiarity. Obviously, no Blake Griffin, and Derrick Rose is gone, and various other injuries, and DeLon Wright, as you mentioned. He's also playing 10 more minutes per game this year than he did last year. Last year, he played almost 27. This year, he's playing a tick over 36. His career high was back in 3 seasons ago when he played for Oklahoma City. He played 33 minutes that game. So otherwise, he's never played more than 21, basically, except for, the hot mess when he was back in the Philadelphia process days. So it's asking a lot. And his field goal attempts, so he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's averaging almost 18 field goal attempts per year. Last year it was 9. The year before that it was 10. And then only one other season of note did he have more than 5 field goal attempts per game. So it's not a surprise that his efficiency is kind of coming down. It could be a myriad of factors between a pandemic, additional use, more focus on him. Who else is the defense going to pay attention to now? At this point, there's no Derrick Rose that could beat you a little bit on some shots or some drive and dish, and no more Blake Griffin. It just makes it a little harder. Maybe he's getting a little bit more attention there. than he was before. But I do think the break is a good thing for a lot of these players. And we forget what a grind it is this year for them, mostly playing every other day at this point.
Yeah, I think that's where I've landed with it. And Jeremy Grant, I think, guy that I'm going to have a little more confidence playing moving forward. We're also about to see the Dallas game start. And I think now we could start to talk about swap-optimizing a little and keep an eye on some of these other plays that are going on too. Svi Mikhailiuk also on the Pistons. Maybe the Pistons a little more spry in the second half that people will give them credit for, where I talked about it on some of these shows earlier before the All-Star break, but they did look like kind of a team possessed in terms of sharing the ball with those last few games without Jeremy Grant, with a lot of the guys being out of the rotation for them. So maybe they are a team to watch here, being competitive down the stretch, even if they're not probably not a team that'll even make it to the play-in tournament. But let's talk about swap-optimizing EMac, because to me, one play that I made before, which we couldn't have talked about on this show, but I got off a lot of Trey Burke, went to Kevin Porter Jr. because we have the news, no John Wall today. Kevin Porter Jr. playing in the G League so far this year has had pretty much his same numbers that he had per 36 last year in the NBA. A guy who stands to gain some minutes here, a guy who also stands to cramp the style of a lot of Rockets EMac. But I feel overall going to Kevin Porter Jr. as your swap-optimizer play, if you have, I'm trying to think any other bad value especially, but yeah, I think guys like Marcus Morris, I'd rather have Kevin Porter Jr. over. I was getting some of him. Really, to me, anybody in the 4K range and below, I would rather have Kevin Porter Jr. right now. But you tell me, is he a guy that you would find to be a priority swap optimization, as assuming that, you know, you have the value spots in there and you probably can't afford to swap over to a guy like Victor Oladipo?
So I think in the 2v2s, that's where he's going to become helpful. So we have no Danwell House, sadly. Pour one out.
Poor Danwell. Poor
Danwell. A Danwell drink, if you will. So no Wall, no House. You've got Oladipo. Gordon's in. He's a little dinged up. Obviously no Christian Wood. So I'm just looking to see here. So Porter, Oladipo, Jason Tate kind of plays every position. Sterling Brown is another guard. They've got more bigs than they do guards, but they don't really have a lot of good, what I would call good players without John Wall. We're down to, you know, these guys would all be, we've talked about this before too, 7, 8, 9, 10 men in the rotation. 3 of them are starting tonight. So what do we say? Bon chance, bonsoir, good luck, whatever good luck. I can't remember French, but whatever good luck is. Yeah, it's going to be a hard one. So Depot would be 1. Porter for me would actually be 2. Jason Tate would be 3. Just because he's kind of like when he first was active this year on the first slate of note where he had importance about a month ago, he was point guard, power forward, and center on the 3 different sides. Just saying. And he was probably realistically more of a shooting guard than anything else, but here we are with him. And then 4, I've turned around a little bit with Justin Patton. So I'm actually interested in him. He was one of the guys I was taking in the late round, like the second to last or last round of the best ball drafts I was doing. And I'm more intrigued just because the raw minutes he's going to have to get at least until Christian Wood comes back. And from that standpoint, I don't think he's a great player, but going against Sacramento is, outside of Washington and Brooklyn, one of the best matchups you can get. And I think this one could be, I'm hoping that, because we've been in this spot before, I'm hoping Houston is functional enough to score and stay in this game. Do we think they have the pieces to do it? And this is, what was the one? Who did they play like a decimated Dallas? Oh no, who blew them out when it was 63-38 at the half?
Was it Memphis? That one?
Yes, thank you. I think it was Memphis. And remember, they couldn't do a single thing at all. That's in play when you're missing this many people. At least until, but think about this: when they come back with Wood and Wall and Oladipo all healthy, now all of a sudden they got 3 good players. It's in night and day compared to what they're going to put out there tonight.
Yeah, I was intrigued with what I saw from them before the All-Star break, and I think this goes the other way to, you know, some teams or some players kind of going slowly into those last few days, just kind of looking forward to the resting part of things. But I thought Houston figured some things out there, and granted, we just saw better shooting from Wall and Oladipo, but I think, you know, having Oladipo being functional, maybe being a little bit of a better player, maybe playing for a trade earlier, as our pal Eric and Greg were talking about on the Live Before Lock show earlier. I think maybe this is a spot where Victor Oladipo can get going. And really the main thing for me with playing any Houston guys, because I'm with you, EMac, I think Jayshawn Tate looks good. I think Patton's playable to me. Kevin Porter Jr., Oladipo would be the priorities, but Eric Gordon, I think you can make a case for, though to me, I would find him to be the weakest out of this group because of the pricing and the fact that he's coming off injury and now has to butt heads with Kevin Porter Jr. and whatever he's going to bring to the table as a fairly high usage guy. But for me, I feel like you could play any of the Rockets really, and I wouldn't argue it too much because they're down enough bodies now. There's no Nwaba, no Mason Jones, also no Danuel House, no John Wall. That's enough guys out of the rotation here that you're still going to probably see like 8 guys, 9 guys in the rotation, but not enough numbers against Sacramento, who, as EMac alluded to earlier, 117.2 defensive efficiency rating. So that's basically means they give up 117 points per 100 possessions. That's the worst mark in the league by a pretty decent margin. Like these guys, if there ever were a night for them to continue to figure it out and figure out how it looks without John Wall, I think this is the night for them. And Oladipo to me would be in every late slate lineup I think I would put in for the most part, because he's really the one vessel I think for this game staying close and feeling competitive, even if the Jayshawn Tates, the Eric Gordons of the world, Kevin Porter Jr., if all these guys, Sterling Brown, another guy who I think is very much a consideration, if they all have good days, like that's fine, but that might not be enough to stay in the game against Sacramento with how well they've been running. I think Oladipo is really the difference maker there. So if you're playing any Kings at all, I would make sure to have Oladipo in a lineup, even if, really for me, any lineups I would make sure to have Victor Oladipo.
Absolutely, and I think he's the crown jewel of this night's slate. And this is no great shakes, because if let's look quickly at our other quote top options, and top options at this point, let's just call it raw points with the projection. So Damian Lillard, tougher matchup going against Chris Paul, as we saw again on the All-Star break. Damian Lillard has unlimited range. But still not going to be the easiest of matchups going against Phoenix, that actually plays defense now and not that Paul's a shutdown defender, but it's one more little tick mark against him. You've got Steph Curry going against the Clippers, which I think is not a great matchup for anybody if nobody gets dizzy or whatever held Kawhi out of his game. But that's tough because they're both good defenders and not like they're going to be guarding him all game. But if he goes into Steph mode, aren't they going to stick one of them on them and try to come away with a win in this one? So that kind of hurts him. And then you got Kawhi and Paul George. Their own fantasy production hinges on how long is Golden State going to stay in this game. They're not going to really need to run these guys into the ground if they don't have to. We could see, I like them for 40 fantasy points, but how many times are they going to get to 50? Right. So I think that makes the upside for those guys all muted a little bit. And then we're left with Oladipo, who's in a phenomenal spot. And I would say De'Aaron Fox on the other side. Now, the interesting thing about Houston, I have not been thrilled about taking opposing players against them, but this decimated squad, come on. There's way less cohesion on team defense and rotating and all that stuff for this one. So I'm okay spending up on Fox. Not sure what I want to do with Tyrese Halliburton, who is, what was he, 8,000, I think, on DK on the late slate.
Oh, is he priced up? I didn't actually pull the salary numbers in for that. He was 6,700 on the main slate, but I didn't get to Halliburton anyway because I just guy coming off an injury, rookie too, and I think there was some talk about a minutes limit, even if I don't know if we're
6,700. For some reason, I thought he was higher.
Okay, so he's the same price. Usually it is the same price, but
yeah. I had to do actual day job stuff today, so I didn't really get. After I wrote my article, I didn't get a circle back on things. What, they're paying me to do work? Come on.
Sacramento, I know you mentioned De'Aaron Fox, and I do think on FanDuel I'd find him a little bit more appealing. On DraftKings, I just wonder if the salaries come up to a point now that, really for a lot of these guys, like you have Harrison Barnes at 7,100 on DK. I just don't know how you really get there at any meaningful level. I know people have been bullish on him throughout the year, and he's definitely been better on a per minute basis, but really not that much better. He's still only a 0.9 fantasy point per minute guy compared to I would have him as a 0.8 guy today, but in general, I just don't know that Harrison Barnes is really that different of a player than he's been historically. I'd rather have Buddy Hield at this point. I think, and I do, to my credit or discredit, looked good the last couple games. Before that, I've been overprojecting Buddy Hield all year long. I don't really know why. His usage hasn't been phenomenal this year, only a 20% rate. So if he's not scoring, he's going to be screwed. But if he starts hitting his shot at a little bit higher of a rate, and I think you do expect him to have some positive regression on his shooting for the most part with how he's played this year, I think Buddy Hield's the guy that I would take out of Sacramento. And, and maybe it is a little point chasey here because he did have 2 outlier efforts before the All-Star break. But I like Buddy Hield the most out of the Kings, other than, I guess, Rashawn Holmes is a center play on a slate that really doesn't have a lot of good ones. But for the Kings, I think Buddy Hield might be my priority guy. And if you got Fox, and never anything wrong with getting De'Aaron Fox, but I'd rather find the money to get to Lillard. I'd rather pay down, get to Oladipo. I'd rather try to take a value play there. I just think there's a lot of ways I can go to get away from Fox. And I think you're paying, a ceiling price for Fox, which is not the best thing to me when a Sacramento team is going to have Halliburton back in the mix too. That's just more point guard minutes that could take possessions away from him that really he needs now at his price point.
Absolutely. I'm seeing a few people asking, Chris, if Oladipo is going to be the highest owned player of the night. A tease. My friend is wearing his red hat tonight. And if we got to get to 100 likes before we're giving away the goods. Now, the main slate ownership projections were free today. The late slates, no. That's going to cost you a few thumbs up. We're at 70. We have 350 people watching. You can get us the other 30. But we just had a fresh run come in about 4 minutes ago. So that'll be worth talking about.
And it is an interesting one too. So yeah, I'll second here our pal EMac's thoughts and hit that like button now. Smash it, in fact, if you can. And we will continue talking about things with the ownership percentages and give you guys top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel for free. And of course, you can always pay for them, get them yourself at awesemo.com/join. But definitely an interesting one for this. Nice little chat from DJ Johnson. I would super chat if I knew how to. Shout out to both you guys for getting me to know Nico Mannion and Jordan Poole last week. 180K. Yeah, that is one game. I guess, EMac, I forgot that was the game before the All-Star break, but yeah, Nico Mannion Day.
It was Jordan Poole. Remember, I kept saying Jordan Poole, and he ended up because there was a little secret information provided by El Negro Loco that had a nice little 30-second or 40-second news clip of Steve Kerr talking about what he wanted to see from Jordan Poole and what he had done in the Orlando bubble and how he wanted to build on that. So I was hinting at that, but the good stuff's behind the paywall, guys. That's what you need to know. But that was the slate I cleaned up on, even though I had limited volume in play. But 80K, thumbs up to you.
That's really
That's
cleaning
amazing.
up on a whole other level.
Yeah.
But honestly, though, that situation, I think this is one we'll see a lot on the late slates, and we certainly talk a lot for the main slate as well. But that's what Houston is tonight. Like Golden State, we talked about in that game where Nico Mannion was a guy who I think could have had a bigger day. Jordan Poole has been a relentless gunner. That's why he's going to be in the rotation today. Steve Kerr saying that he's earned his spot in the rotation. That's the next stage of his evolution, or whatever Kerr's exact words were. I think that Houston, to me, does harken back to that a little, where just a lot of guys are going to get possessions tonight and just have to fill the void of no John Wall, to a lesser extent, no Christian Wood, no House as well. It does take some possessions that, would normally be gobbled up off the floor. And I think going to Houston tonight is going to be that move. We'll keep talking about the rest of the games here. And again, guys, smash that like button. You guys passed 100, so you're good to go. But help us out. Again, we're trying to keep this show afloat really every night, and making sure that we are hitting the requisite numbers we need to hit to make sure that people are seeing this show every night. So hit that like button, help us out. Let's talk a little bit of Phoenix before we get to the rest of the slate and give away some ownership numbers. Phoenix, Devin Booker going to be ruled in today, was questionable throughout most of the day. And I think his price point looks fine to me for the late slate. He wasn't a guy I would have considered, I got to get him in for the main slate itself, though. I guess if you're worried about Oladipo's ownership, he would be sort of the most logical pivot to go to. 8K on DraftKings. And I think, certainly a comparable play, especially if Houston were to get rolled tonight. But I feel like Booker for the late slate, Booker and Ayton would be the ones I'd prioritize. Chris Paul's not too far behind, but far behind enough that I think he wouldn't be a guy I'd want much of, especially on a slate today where you have so much value, so many plays that are obvious, EMac. But who would you prioritize from Phoenix, if anybody, going against a soft Portland defense, but also a Portland offense that could definitely keep up with Phoenix, even if Phoenix does what they do defensively, which is mostly limit teams really in a meaningful way?
Chris Paul's going to be number 1. Dario Saric is actually going to be number 2 on DK. He slots in, sadly not small forward, but power forward and center. So that means he's eligible for 4 of our spots there with the power forward, forward, center, and utility. He feels good for about 20-25 fantasy points. Potential upside in this matchup against Portland. Potentially accessible. I don't foresee him getting over 30, but I think he's someone that's going to come in with limited popularity, and that is a way to go here. Let's see. Saric he's coming in at 14%. So I'll probably have 25 to 30 will be my number there.
Interesting. I don't see Sarge as being one of my guys tonight, but I guess at the price point, I mean, you have such good value though in Kevin Porter Jr., at least on paper, and I guess maybe you're making assumptions there. But is that how you're treating Sarge, where he's a pivot away from some of the other value that's going to be much higher owned?
So I'm trying to look for some players that are not going to be Houston Rockets that are in that range there. It's going to be, we'll look to the Clippers. I'm not as excited about Nick Batum. I don't really see that they need him a lot. He's going to he and Marcus Morris kind of cut into each other's upside. But I am interested in Reggie Jackson for a little bit of mop-up duty. And I think this is a good spot for Pat Beverly. I think they'll probably come close to splitting those minutes. Could see him play a little alongside each other. Not that they'll really need to with everybody with on the Clippers healthy. But I think that those are two guys that are among our limited value options that I'm going to try to be above the field on as well. And this is just to counter the Houston guys. Now, what I may do is still go pretty heavy on the Houston guys, but with these other three players that I've mentioned, and then try to get real heavy with a Lillard or Chris Paul, in addition to Oladipo, in addition to a Rashawn Holmes or somebody else, and try to get more players that I think have a shot at 40 plus fantasy points.
Okay, I think that's a reasonable explanation there. I would worry with Sarge, just a 20-minute projection from Awesemo. Is there? I mean, there is more.
Oh, it's not a slam dunk, Chris. It's most certainly not.
that's why.
See how I used your phrasing? Do I get that? Pause.
You dunked it right back on me. No, I get it for tournaments. I just feel like, to me, that with the value that we have, and I get that's sort of the point of it, is that you're moving away from the really, on this slate in particular, you have one very obvious attractive game with that Houston game where you're having players out, you're having a shortened rotation, all the things that we talk about on these shows being very important. There is probably some tournament logic in going more to just these slightly lesser projected plays that maybe are in more competitive games. The Phoenix game, only a 4-point spread, favoring Phoenix as well on the road. So Portland is a home dog in that one. And Golden State, that game too, even though EMac mentioned, it's not crazy this game could blow out and get out of hand here, still a 7-point spread only in that game favoring the Clippers at home. So I do think if you are going to get different, I guess, EMac, is there a world where you'd play not a single Rocket and just take everybody from, I guess, Sacramento or the other two games?
Did you know that is a strategy that the boss man likes to employ? He does it. He talks about it a lot on the NFL slates, where we had a couple of those times where we had 2 and 3 game slates, and going into Thanksgiving on the strategy shows, and then in the playoffs, he was mentioning oftentimes it's, if you want to do something different in the field, is eliminate a team each time you're making a new set of builds. And not the whole game, just a team. But that way you aren't going to have a smattering of those people. And if that team if it goes poorly or they get shut down, now all of a sudden you've got built-in leverage against the field. And that's something that's harder to do on these short slates, because everybody's going to have a certain level of ownership. No one's going overlooked. But that's another way of, that's like the opposite of where we said, hey, if you construct your lineups properly, we can show you and teach you and explain to you how to build the correlation and make it so even if you match the field in your overall player pool with whom those other players are matched with, that can give you a better edge on the field because your lineups are concentrated in a certain way. This would be the opposite of that strategy, but to get the same result being different within a limited player pool. So I like that. I had not thought about that, but I like that because especially, naturally it'll probably happen for Phoenix, right? Because they're all kind of their best plays are like 5x, and that's where players start to fall out on even on the shorter slates. But Houston's are all way better than that. So maybe just unchecking them, making 10 lineups if you're making 40 would be a way to get very, very unique.
No, I think that makes some sense, especially on a 3-game slate. And I'm in one too, where again, Houston is just so obvious that sometimes there can be value just in assuming the worst. Like, projections are meant to be representative of a median outcome. We've talked about this a lot on shows, where the reason that plays become chalk isn't because the industry is conspiring against you to get on the worst plays, as some of our friends in YouTube chat may occasionally think, but it's because there's a consensus best play across the industry on most days. And on this slate, it is definitely Houston. So there are going to be guys you probably want more of than not, but like EMac is saying, if you got different for 25% of your lineups that didn't have a single Rocket, it could be the kind of thing that takes something down, even though for more often than not, I think you're going to want to bet against that Sacramento defense rather than betting on them to somehow get good results. And we are at about the halfway point of the show, so that means it's basically time to flip the hat and do a little something we call money time. Not as many live before lock shows as me with the schedule with our pal Laffy on paternity leave. So I don't get as much money time in my life, EMac, and I'm sure you've been dying for it too with the week off we've had of games.
Absolutely. This is the highlight of my day.
It's
really been one of those days.
Watching another grown man flip a hat, the highlight of my day. That's the kind of bond we have here at Awesemo. But it's money time. You guys hit the like button. So hit the like button some more while I give you guys the top 5 projected owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. And number 1, a man who's made a big move with the announcement that he'll be officially in today. And also with no John Wall, Kevin Porter Jr., 3,200 on DraftKings, 49% expected ownership on DraftKings. Number 2, Victor Oladipo, guy we talked about a lot, 41% for him. So this is why we talk so much Rockets. Number 3, Kawhi Leonard, 37%. Number 4, Paul George and his dizziness, 36%. And number 5, Eric Gordon at 36%. EMac, out of these 4 guys, is one standout, or 5 guys on DraftKings, is one standout as being a little bit overowned for what you want to do?
Yes. Let me get back over there. For me, the surprise was Kevin Porter. Now he's 3,200, so that's really going to be the difference maker. But after that, it's actually Kawhi and Paul George. And remember, I said, I like them to get 40 fantasy points, but this is like tonight. I think with the based on matchup and the likelihood of them controlling the game and winning, of course they got to play it, and weird stuff happens all the time, and Steph could go nuclear, but I don't foresee them going over 50 fantasy points very often. So this is the Zion Williams range. He's going to get 40. Is he going to get 50? 1 in 5 times they each do, maybe? Does that feel about right in this particular scenario? So they're not going to kill you, but what are you going to get for it? But what if you go a little bit differently and you get a De'Aaron Fox who ends up getting 50, 55? Because on the slate, we're going to have to look at some of the raw points. Right? We've got enough value that you can get to a Dame Lillard. Yeah, he's going to have to struggle to get there, but I think he's going to get I don't remember what we have him projected for, but probably around 50 or 52 fantasy points, right? So I think he has a better shot at getting to 50. And those would be the guys I would kind of try to target.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would favor Dame by a pretty decent margin over Kawhi Leonard. I think Kawhi's a fine play. I actually would have him better projected than Paul George. But the guy who stands out to me there that I don't like that much is Eric Gordon, just because I think having Kevin Porter Jr. in the mix, as well as having Sterling Brown out there who does take some possessions away. We talked about Jayshawn Tate earlier, another guy. Like, there are enough guys in the mix now who I think you could justify taking possessions away from Eric Gordon, especially coming off of the knee injury, that I don't know that I want to be on Gordon as much as the field's going to be. He doesn't project quite as well for me, and I just don't feel comfortable getting there a lot. I'd rather take the value in Porter Jr. I'd rather go up in money, go to Oladipo. But to me, I think Gordon would be the one that stands out, I guess, excluding Paul George and his tolerance for coffee. On FanDuel, the top 5 owned plays, though, Jayshawn Tate, number 1 is 67%. Number 2, Kawhi Leonard at 64%. Number 3, Victor Oladipo at 59%. Number 4, Eric Gordon again at 53%, though he is much cheaper on FanDuel, so I think the logic is a bit more sound. And De'Aaron Fox, underpriced, 52% on FanDuel. EMac, relative to FanDuel pricing here, where you have Tate, Kawhi, Victor Oladipo, Eric Gordon, and Fox. Does any of these 5 jump out to you as being not as worthwhile for the ownership?
Let's see here. So I got a visual. I got to see it black and white here. Sure. Definitely Eric Gordon for the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, so he's going to knock out shooting guard, but wait, because we have to play 2 of them. But who else is there? Well, Victor Oladipo. And if you go Oladipo and Eric Gordon, you're going to be the same out of one out of every 4 lineups is going to have that pairing. So maybe you go Oladipo and look to somebody else. Let's see, not as great a play, but a Devin Booker, perhaps. That's one heck of a pivot there within FanDuel. That'll help get you different. Or you could even go down to a Buddy Hield or an Andrew Wiggins. And that's the one thing that we want to remember when playing on FanDuel is it's like 5 little games within the game. Center's always your trickiest spot because you can only have one. So last night it seemed crazy to not have Jonas Valanciunas there, and I liked it so much I actually did play on FanDuel last night because I wanted to leverage that particular situation. But then you have to think about where's the positions deepest, where are they not, and if you have 2 incredibly chalky players at the same position like we do for Oladipo and Gordon. You multiply the estimated products against each other, and then that that percentage is the likelihood of the number of lineups that will have both of them, if I'm remembering math correctly. But that means 1 in 4 lineups are going to have that. That's a pretty high number. I don't like that. I would like to go somewhere else, and I'm already not a fan of Eric Gordon, so that would be the one I would go against there. I am not playing on FanDuel tonight.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think with FanDuel especially, I agree. Going away from Eric Gordon there. Paul George also, like, you play Oladipo and Paul George. If you want to get out of that price point entirely, you can go you go to Buddy Hield. Like, there's some other ways to go at the position that I think makes sense. And Jae'Sean Tate too, being a somewhat obvious value. I get it. I like Jae'Sean Tate a lot tonight. I honestly, Jae'Sean Tate's a weird guy. And EMac, I know you mentioned his positionality and some of the different things he does where he can play basically 5 positions on the floor, at least by Houston Rockets standards, which admittedly are not the highest. But Jae'Sean Tate just always projects well for me. And I don't really get why, but like, he's only a 0.8 fantasy point per minute guy on the year. Jae'Sean Tate just feels a little trappy for FanDuel, but I guess you just got to take the value where you can get it. And Tate is that guy, seems by a wide margin.
Yeah, I think he kind of contributes a little bit of everything. That's probably how you end up getting him a lot.
Yeah.
He's one of those guys to borrow your phrase that has now become Eric Lindquist's phrase, spike in upside.
Eric Lindquist did steal that from me directly.
He does like that. But now he's changed to express an upside. He's trying to branch out a little bit there.
You know what you do to express? That's what they refer to with dog anal glands.
That's every time he says that. That's the only thing I think of. Is my dog expresses something.
But I think that's the acting teacher in Eric, though, where he's thinking like express an upside, like they're showing their range as a basketball player. They're expressing their upside. For it. Eric cannot go a show that I'm on. I feel like just on the channel in general, that's somebody just lightly roasting him. It's just, but it all makes you more famous, Eric. That's why you gotta find the joy.
That reminds me of the NWA song, Express Yourself. There you go.
Yes, that's what very similar people there, considering Eric Lindquist and NWA, two groups of people very similar. Damian Lillard, I think we need to talk about more because this matchup against Phoenix has been kind of ugly in the past, including for Lillard, where he's certainly the defense for Phoenix has limited a lot of lead ball handlers in a way you wouldn't expect. But that said, I do think Lillard to me is a priority play on the slate, and I'm actually going to check the ownership. He's not a top 5 owned play because we would have given you guys that, but he's out just outside of it on DraftKings, and actually just outside of it on FanDuel, excuse me. On DraftKings, he'll be a little bit lower, only a quarter of the field on him, and that's where I'm playing. So I just am a Lillard fan most nights for the upside that he has, which granted has been a little bit more hit or miss other than when he's playing Sacramento. But in this spot against Phoenix, getting a little bit of an all-star break, I think Lillard's another guy where this is really his last run before he has to start sharing the keys with CJ McCollum again. Also, Yusuf Nurkic going to be back in the rotation fairly soon. I think Lillard is going to have a good run here after the all-star break. And to me, Mac, I think he's a priority play despite the high price, but we have enough value on the slate where for DraftKings especially, I just feel like getting above the field on Lillard would be something I would go out of my way to do. On FanDuel, where half the field's going to be on him, I think probably not as much of a necessity. But EMac, how do you feel about Lillard being just about 25% owned for the night slate where we know the upside, but granted Phoenix has been tough. So I could see why people might be reluctant to go there and trust Dame.
He would be the guy I would go to second after Oladipo tonight. I would like to have Lillard on close to half my lineups, I think. I would like to pair him on that half of that half with Chris Paul. And go for a little synergistic, I'm getting mine, you getting yours, te-a-te, if you will.
All right. Yeah, I think that's fair. Lillard, to me, just obviously there aren't a ton of high-priced studs on the slate, so you are making a choice in your lineup construction there. But on DraftKings, I just think people are maybe not getting creative enough if you're going to get there. And we do have the value. I think especially if you're taking a Kevin Porter Jr., I don't know why you wouldn't put Lillard in and decrease that ownership product a bit compared to some of the other guys. Paul George especially. I just feel like, finding a little extra money going to Lillard would be the move that I would look at there. Our boy El Negro Loco, the news god, of course, who's bringing news to you guys every single day. If you're part of Awesemo.com's Awesemo Plus packages, make sure you go to awesemo.com/join. Any of the packages on there will get you access to the premium Slack. And Alex is talking about today how he uses El Negro Loco News God's alerts every day with the Slack settings, so he knows that there's a special vibration whenever, which sounds more romantic now that I'm putting it out there like that.
Well,
sometimes you just want a special vibration telling you, hey, News God's here. That's what we're saying. But no, he's putting news into its own Slack channel every single day. And I think that's a very helpful asset to you guys, part of any package at awesemo.com/join. But he asked any Sterling Brown love tonight. And I mentioned him briefly, but to me, he's another value play that I would consider not as much of a priority as Kevin Porter Jr. because the usage is not quite as high. And he is also a guy to me like Eric Gordon, who's going to get squeezed just a bit by having Porter out there hunting his shot as he does normally. But I think EMac, Sterling Brown very much in the mix as a value play. I personally would favor him over your great friend Dario Saric tonight, but certainly Sterling Brown not going to be completely overlooked ownership wise. But how do you feel about him relative to the ownership that we have for him, which is at he's a top owned play that just disappeared from me. He's at 28%, so pretty highly owned, but not as highly owned as I think he should be.
I would have him right around that scrum with his teammates Patton and Tate.
Okay.
I think that's appropriate. Well, and to answer the question that we're going to get next, how many Houston Rockets would you play? Probably 3 on a team.
Ooh, also, we just got the starters for Houston, so this could be important. Oladipo, Gordon, Brown, Tate, Patton are the starters. Okay. So Patton's minutes get more secure. PJ Tucker now not starting. So if you were,
they need his offense off the bench, Chris.
That's right. He's going to be the Lou Williams. So finally get his shine. I think this is great news for Kevin Porter Jr. He's going to be getting that second unit run with Sterling Brown, who I think is going to probably set him up fairly well. He's probably also going to be, I guess, the lead ball handler alongside Brown, though they could stagger the minutes for Oladipo and Gordon a little bit. But with Gordon coming off a knee injury, I don't know for sure about that. I think this makes Kevin Porter Jr. to me, like if you're playing a lot of lineups on DraftKings, I know if I were playing a lot, I only did my usual handful that I put in. I would just put Kevin Porter Jr. in right now. Him getting any unencumbered usage in that second unit, I think is really going to bode well for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And now's the time where you start wanting to consider late swapping to him if you don't have him already in some of your lineups on the main slate. Now that we have that particular information. And that was one of those where I don't know where he'd really land because I didn't know. I mean, I figured he was going to play and they wouldn't have called him back if he wasn't going to play. But if he ended up, even with them shorthanded and did something foolish or his head wasn't in the game or fill in your platitude there, and he only had 16 minutes tonight, would that be a shocking outcome? No, it would not.
No, you're taking on some risk, but I think in this particular case, the risk is, to me, very much balanced out by the fact that he's 3,200 on DraftKings and that he's also dual position eligible. So you could put him in a couple different spots. Like that to me is where I would want to be. So I'm going to be heavy Kevin Porter. I mentioned earlier, if you could find ways to swap him, if you had value for me, it was coming off of Trey Burke a little more, though. In hindsight, I guess I wish I just played Kevin Porter Jr. straight up over Jalen Brunson with how that's looking so far, but neither here nor there. Kevin Porter Jr., I think just not starting, his minutes would be more secure if he were starting, but he's just not competing for shots with anybody in that second unit from what I could tell.
Yeah, we don't have the way back machine, sadly.
Yeah. Patton too, I think needs to be talked about a little bit more. 4,900 on DK and maybe in the mix on FanDuel too. But Patton, I think definitely a guy who just knowing that he's going to be a little bit more secure in his minutes, knowing that he's going to be out there against Sacramento team that stinks so bad. Like Patton, I think is a very viable play on both sides today, Mac. And does he get a bump for you now that we know for sure Awesemo had him for 27 minutes already, but it feels like it's hard to imagine him not getting that 27 minutes if he's going to be playing also not alongside PJ Tucker anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he becomes an excellent play. I think enough people on the late slate are going to maneuver that way, but then that also means we could see an imbalance with Cantor or Ayton or Rashawn Holmes or some of those guys. So keep that in mind that as Patton's numbers go up, that probably means that we will also see George and Kawhi's go up and the chalk gets a little more chalky. So counter that.
Yep. Okay. I think that's reasonable. And I guess to answer the question of how many Rockets are too many, I feel I
didn't answer that. I could see 3 in addition to Victor Oladipo. I would prefer 3 total.
I think you can justify because of how the rotations are going to break down. I think you could justify getting to 4 or 5. At least I can justify it with how it projects for me, where I just think the value on the slate looks mostly not good. And I'd rather take guys who I think are going to project well. And granted, the logic that we talked about earlier is still there, where if you don't put Houston in your lineups, you're going to be different right away. But, if you think about how these units are going to look against Sacramento, who plays fast and bad defense, like 3 guys from that starting group can get there pretty easily, I think. And I like Oladipo, Tate, and Patton in that first group. And then I think Brown and Porter Jr. coming off the bench. I guess the one sticky wicket potentially, which I don't know. I've never said that phrase out loud, but I'm saying it today. So why not? The one sticky wicket here from my cricket days, I would say is that just Eric Gordon could screw it up enough. But if I think Eric Gordon stinks today, which I do, coming off the knee injury, then I think going to Tate and Patton and Oladipo is fine by me. And then going to the second unit where you have Brown and Porter Jr. getting some amount of run, both guys capable of sneaking into that closing lineup. I just don't mind playing 5, even though, and maybe that's the way to get different, even though you're probably cutting the margins a little bit close.
I think that's those are all fair points, Chris.
All right, we got some questions in the chat, which we can hit on here.
Sure.
Let's see. Paul George or Devin Booker? For me, I would go Devin Booker's way in that one. Paul George, not even accounting for, whatever dizziness he doesn't know, his coffee tolerance, all those things that we can make fun of night in and night out.
Wait, did it turn out to be a coffee thing?
Yeah, he drank too much coffee.
Okay.
I mean, he's a grown-ass man who doesn't know. Look, sometimes, man, you're getting a little too wild, having too many coffees with the boys, and then that's what happens. You can't stand up straight. One of the weirder rollouts, but yeah, definitely didn't get the hype as some of the other ones we've had in the past.
Yeah. Sorry, Pandemic P.
EMac for you, and I'm going to assume this is DraftKings, but Paul George or Devin Booker for you, because they are a little bit different. I think on FanDuel it might be Paul George, but on DraftKings it's Devin Booker for me.
It's definitely going to be Devin Booker for me.
Okay.
And that's going risk tolerance. We didn't know if he was going to play or not. All that fun stuff. But that's that tonight. If he's in, they're not. They act. Wait for this. Phoenix has designs on the postseason. I don't think they're rushing Devin Booker back. When could we last say that? Never. It feels like.
Yeah, I think they're a legitimate championship contender. But
Ben McLemore. We haven't mentioned his name, Chris.
Because I think he's out of the rotation. Now he's not out of the rotation, but he's like a meaningfully less important part of the rotation. I've whatever he's done, I think he's in Steven Silas's doghouse. So I don't see him getting the run today, even with them being relatively short on bodies.
All right. Hat tip to one of my old co-hosts, the human computer, Justin Van Zuden. You guys know him as STL Cards. He coined the term Ben Mac LOL more on Twitter. All his day. Oh, revenge. Remember, Sacramento gave up on him.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, McLemore.
Remember me.
I wouldn't consider him a pivot to Kevin Porter Jr. And I think that's how people will view it, because Porter Jr. rebounds fairly well. He assists fairly well. Like, those things are important to me. I think maybe he takes enough shots away from Sterling Brown where maybe that's the move, is he save the $900 and go to him. But I just don't see it from a projection basis or the run he's been getting. Only 18 minutes projected by Awesemo for Ben McLemore today. But if you're playing 150, you're probably getting there enough, just because you got to get different with your Rockets. Let's see.
How do you feel about Wiseman? Bit of a wild card. Yeah.
He got a lot of run in that last game before All-Star break, which I know we talked about in a lot of the shows today. And I just don't know that run is going to be there tonight. Like, he's fine at his price point, but I kind of would rather go a little bit cheaper and go to Serge Ibaka. I'd rather find more money and go, or Justin Patton actually now. Wiseman's fine to me. He just wasn't a guy for me putting in just a handful of lineups. I don't think he's a priority. I don't trust the minutes to be there.
Right. And you don't want to, friends saying hello to each other. Robert Covington, Dario Saric. Feel the love there.
I mean, I enjoy my Covington, but Covington too expensive. Maybe Dario though. But you could have a little anger narrative for those guys. Or not anger, but former Philadelphia Sixer narrative that maybe they probably hated each other. I feel like everybody in that hated each other. You could stretch a little.
That's what. Yeah, I was just gonna say that in the business we call a stretch or a reach.
If you look at the results that team got, I think there was a very credible argument to say that they all hated each other, and that's why it got broken up. Let's see. Looking for questions in the chat. If you got them on YouTube or on the premium Slack, drop them in now. We'll get them. John Gillen saying Wiseman not starting Looney. I think that's probably true, though. We don't have that starting lineup out yet, at least that I haven't seen. But he's available to play. Oh no, my bad. We did have it. I thought we did, and I was like, I don't see it up top here, but I guess the Warriors actually got their lineup in a very early and timely fashion. So kudos to them. But yeah, Looney's starting. It doesn't matter though for if Looney's starting or not, because Wiseman can close, and that's really the main thing for him. But Looney, another minimum salary guy, you could probably make an argument for if you stretch hard enough, but I just don't see that being a play that I want a ton of.
No, and I'm just making my lineups here to get them in. I'm going. I just made 25% of them without the Rockets. We'll find out how that works. And then somehow I will still end up being over the field for my overall player portfolio, which I'm totally fine with for Houston because they're in a good spot. So it looks like Lillard and Kevin Porter and Chris Paul are my top three. Victor Oladipo coming in at 53% of my lineup. Sterling Brown 40, Jayshawn Tate 40, De'Aaron Fox 38, Beverly 33, Harrison Barnes 33, Devin Booker 33, Ibaka 30, Saric 30, Covington 22, and then it's a hodgepodge at that point.
Also, just grabbing a quick minutes update from Awesemo.
Kawhi Leonard on one lineup, Steph Curry on two.
All right, so you're fading that game, and the late night hammer game, the important game between two star teams. That's the one on national TV, Mac. That's the one you want to.
I'm now making a Steph Curry versus Kawhi Leonard lineup, just so if I need to watch that game, I have two players to root for. There we go.
Yeah, I think it might be logical to get a little skin in that game there. We had a question about Frank Kaminsky, if starting makes him a worse player or not. I mean, it's going to decrease his rates, but having a little more security to the minutes seems good. The issue for him, Awesemo still only has him getting 17 minutes, and Saric is really the one who's breathing down his neck for that run. I don't think it makes him, he's not unplayable. He's 3,500. I think if you're trying to find a way to get different, if you're either brave enough to pivot off of Kevin Porter Jr., or if you're just adding Kaminsky to a lineup with him to try to get two similar price guys who maybe would not be occurring a lot in the same lineups. I don't hate Kaminsky. He just doesn't project to me as nearly as good of a value, and he can earn more minutes. So I would give him credit for that, but I just don't think you could project him for enough minutes right now to feel comfortable, EMac, unless you feel any differently here. I feel like if you're team Dario, you probably can't be team Frank Kaminsky.
I'm just looking. I have 6% Kaminsky, 2% Nasir Little, 2% Eric Pascal. So those are just people coming in on one lineup. So they're not even really in my player pool. Wiseman ended up on 14%. I should point this out. I went with Ivica Zubac. I bumped his projection so I'd get him on 20% of my lineups. That's doubling the field, and I think that's appropriate. I like the matchup for him going against Golden State, and he could be one of the guys that gets mop-up run over Serge Ibaka.
Dennis Kardakis, Kardakaris. That's I'm going to go. It's Dennis Kardakaris asking, is KPJ playing today in your opinion? If this guy just turned into the show, I hope you did, because if you have somehow missed us talking about Kevin Porter Jr., me in particular, throughout the entire show, I don't know what to tell you, but he is expected to play here. Awesemo has him in for, I'll give you the projection for minutes just to fully close the loop here. And of course, you can always get the minutes projections and player projections at awesemo.com/join. Has been for 25 minutes, and that's maybe an aggressive minutes projection, but they're so short on bodies here. Only 8 guys expected to get run today in Awesemo's minutes projection that it does seem like a fairly safe projection, EMac. And I guess with your final exposures for Kevin Porter Jr., do you have any sort of insight as to where I think you said it already, but if this guy just tuned in, give him the final number you got.
Sure. He is my number one player on DK, mostly because of his price at 3,200. It also helps that he's both shooting guard and small forward eligibility, so he qualifies for 5 of the spots on the DK roster. That's incredible flexibility. I'm coming in at 64%. If he's a DNP, oh well. Or if he has a bad game, them's the breaks. Just need one lineup to break through here. But I'm comfortable with those.
Oh, there we go. So Dennis has an excuse. He just woke up in Australia. So EMac, give us your best Australian accent.
My best Australian accent is horrible. G'day, mate.
I think the thing with Australian accents, if I remember correctly from my non-existent time in accent school, is that they go up at the end like it's a question. So I just woke up in Australia, I think would be how it would go. But I think Tyler said that was a perfect impression and that he would stake his reputation on it. So thank you, Tyler.
And the sad trombone crosses all accents.
Rodney Davis asking a question in Australian as well. What do you think about Booker? And I think Booker is a solid play. Jason Walridge asking, so are PG and Book better than Oladipo? We have not said that this show. I think EMac, we would both favor Oladipo by a pretty decent
correct
margin, right?
Yep. I have Oladipo on half my lineups tonight. That's going to be maybe a little bit higher than the field, but not much.
Anthony Davis, shout out Anthony Davis, the most generous
yeah.
man on Super Chat game. Let's hammer this late slate. They laughed me when I said 0% Tobias, ended up with 3%, but I have 63% Boucher. Time to hit the like button. Yeah, good job by you. That is sometimes the brave takes you have to make some, and when you know a play is chalky. On his face, Tobias Harris did look like a fantastic play, and I think he'll still get there, but probably the chances of him catching Boucher in terms of a ceiling performance are not quite there. And Boucher was much cheaper on DraftKings too. So that is definitely going to be a different construction. So smart move by Anthony Davis. I see why he has so much money now to spend on these super chats.
Indeed.
Let's see.
I believe Eric Lindquist was going to have a lot of Tobias Harris. I have like 65% Tobias Harris. So, but I thought he was saying like 90% on his show. He and Greg were going very heavy on him.
Spags tries so hard to be funny, it's pathetic. Says Muggsy was trash. It comes easily to be Muggsy. Have no fear. And this is the comfort levels you achieve when you're hosting a show. I hope to see yours sometime soon. Muggsy was trash. I'm sure you're not just a troll under another name. Let's keep going through here. Some of the questions on chat. Asking a question about Crowder. We're getting a couple people, I guess, asking about Jamison Crowder. Not Jamison Crowder. They're asking about NFL's Jamison Crowder. They're asking about Jay Crowder. EMac, do you feel anything for Crowder today? I feel like we've talked a lot about these Phoenix kind of second tier plays, and Crowder, I think, would pop up to me if I were playing a lot of lineups, but I haven't projected under a 5x threshold. Awesemo's number for him even lower. Crowder, I feel like not a play you would want, though. You can get to him. I just don't think, like, what's the ceiling for Crowder in a game where you have Booker in, where you have Kaminsky in, where you have all these guys, Saric in? I just don't know that Crowder's that much of a guy I'd want to get to, EMac. But do you feel differently at all about Jay?
No, I looked at him early on in the day, and if memory serves, he had like somewhere around like 25 fantasy points in each of his last two outings. He's a good jack of all trades, but he's mostly a 3-and-D guy or whatever they need him to do, which is generally not going to be shooting the ball, especially when you've got Ayton, Chris Paul, and of course Devin Booker on the squad. So that's going to be a no for me.
Jason, this guy Jason Walrich, you got to watch the whole show. You can't ask me for things that we already did 25 minutes ago. Skip back to the 6:30 mark, and you will find the FanDuel ownership that we gave away for free. But I'm not doing it again. That's what money time is. Time is money, and that's really the main point of money time. Mike asking Gary Trent or Chris Paul, two completely different price points. For raw points, it would be Chris Paul, and then for value, it would also be Chris Paul. So Chris Paul on both fronts for me, EMac, unless you feel drastically differently.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know what projection you're getting for Gary Trent that would be that close, but that's that definitely should be Chris Paul. Timothy Talion asking Bridges or Wiseman, last man in DK cash and utility. If we're going for cash here,
I gotta go Bridges.
Yeah, let's see.
Just Wiseman's too much uncertainty with Wiseman.
Bridges? Bridges projected for twice as much ownership, and the minutes are a little more secure. So yeah, it's probably got to be Bridges if you're playing cash with those guys. Muggsy was trash. Need to know the best pay down option tonight. What is it? Never gonna tell you. Never gonna tell you. You say nice things, we'll tell you. Honestly, just listen to the show. Batum or Kaminsky on a DK GPP. EMac, do you have a lean for those two? I honestly don't think I would get to either in my first 10 or so lineups, but I would agree with, but I would go with Frank the Tank first. Just be cognizant that he may not be out there in the fourth quarter as they mix and match to go. If Cantor's not out there, there's a decent chance that Kaminsky won't be out there, and there's a decent chance Cantor won't be out there. Yeah, and yes, I know Ayton is going to be in the closing lineup, is my guess, but Frank could be out. Batum projected for 20.4 fantasy points by Awesemo. I'm pretty close to that as well. Frank Kaminsky projected for 16 fantasy points by Awesemo. So unless you have a feel that Kaminsky can earn more minutes than he's going to be given, it's probably going to be going towards Batum's way just for the minute security that's there. Skater Perez asking, I know Sacramento's a good environment, but their price is up a little besides Holmes. No one seems a little underpriced. What do you guys think? Haven't heard too much about Sacramento exposure. I think Sacramento's mostly appropriately priced. The only guy, I always make a case to get to De'Aaron Fox, as we talked about earlier, but Buddy Hield's really my only king that I would find getting to at a worthwhile amount, because I think his price still has a little bit of upside if he does shoot the way he's been shooting recently, though it's Buddy Hield, who knows. EMac, do you feel anything here? Did you end up with any surprising numbers with Sacramento Sacramento? I know you gave your exposures already.
On the main slate, no. Fox, Barnes, Bagley, and Holmes are all like 4%. Although I did put Holmes in my cash game lineup on the late slate. Why is that not changing? Oh, I need to go over here. On the late slate, it is Fox and Barnes are at 34%. Bagley 18, Holmes 6, Bielitsa 10, Corey Joseph just cannon fodder at 4. So no, not very much. I would have thought I would have more.
All right, I've got a couple seconds here left to lock by the time you guys hear this. Jacob Kimball asking Gordon or Trent. I don't like Eric Gordon, but I would still take him over Trent in this situation.
Oh, yes, I reluctantly agree.
Yeah, Gordon to me overowned, but I just don't think Trent projects that well. And I guess Mike was asking about raw points, the real life points for Paul versus Trent. I'm not sure why you need that, but I have Chris Paul projected for 17.5 real life points. Gary Trent projected for 17.1. So I guess closer there, but I'd still favor Chris Paul. And we are locked. So EMac, I believe you're back with me tomorrow. Is that correct?
I'm back with you tomorrow. As much as I try to get off the Friday shows, I keep coming back like a boomerang. See what I did there, our Australian friends? No accent needed for that joke.
You're something else, EMac. But I'll be back tomorrow with EMac. Check out the Live Before Lock show tomorrow, where I'll be with one of EMac's frequent show partners, Terry McBride, our Director of Customer Success, who's responsible for all your success at Awesemo. So tune into those shows. Of course, subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow at EMac DFS, follow at Chris Spags, follow at Awesemo_com, and shout out to our producer, Tyler, even with his hurtful sound effects that he plays to mock me, giving out perfect impressions that any Australian would be proud of. But we appreciate you guys for watching. Come back tomorrow. We'll see you guys again soon, and go Kevin Porter Jr. Go. Bye.